I'm Rob Nielsen. I'm the co-founder and president of Ashby Bowhunting Foundation.
Hello, I'm Troy Fowler. I'm a director at the Ashby Bowhunting Foundation.
Howdy, I'm Steve Hall. I'm with Texas Parks and Wildlife. I'm the Hunter Education Coordinator, also oversee bow hunter education.
We're here to talk to you today about the 12 penetration enhancing factors which will help your clients that come hunt with you recover their animals a lot quicker and make your clients a lot happier, make your trackers a lot happier because they will have short tracking jobs.
The 12 factors include structural integrity, so it's literally the durability of the arrow broadhead system. Perfect arrow flight, absolutely perfect arrow flight, and we'll discuss that factor here in a little bit. The highest possible forward to center, which is the amount of mass on your arrow that's in the point and forward of the middle of the arrow. High mechanical advantage broadheads, which are long and narrow, and we'll explain that. Shaft diameter, literally the diameter of the shaft. Is a very skinny shaft or a very fat arrow, and then different shapes therein. The total mass of the arrow is generally considered the higher the mass, the better the penetration. Blade edge finish, smooth, honed, and stropped. We'll talk about that in great detail. Shaft profile. Is it barrel tapered? Is it parallel? Does it have a big fat front end and a small tail? Or is it all parallel? We'll cover that. Broadhead profile. Does the broadhead have any bumpy edges or anything that can hang and unusual parts to it? Or is it nice and smooth for transition into the target animal? The edge bevel type. Literally, is it double bevel, single bevel, and what does that look like? Tip design. Is it very narrow, pointy? Is it the Tonto tip? Is it extremely durable? Or is it something that looks a little bit in between? And then finally, the heavy bone threshold. 650 grains has been established by Dr. Ed Ashby as the heavy bone threshold with the ability to breach bone. However, all 12 factors need to be a component of that arrow, and every one of these factors is in order. So 1 is most important, down to 12. They all need to be there to make this highest performing arrow. But they are ranked in order from 1 to 12, and if you don't start at 1 and move down and you skip 3 or 4 of them, you have a 50% arrow. Don't forget, shot placement is key. You can have a 12-factor arrow, and if you are not accurate with your shot placement, then these factors will help, but it is imperative that you practice, know your lethal range, stay within that, and put the arrow where it needs to be.
The first one is structural integrity of your arrow system, and it starts with the very tip of your broadhead all the way through your arrow shaft. If any part of that bends, breaks, your penetration is greatly reduced or stopped. If your broadhead bends when it hits a bone, let's say it hits a rib and bends, you've got a cheap metal and it bends, that arrow is going to try to follow that arrow. It's going to impede your penetration. If your broadhead crushes back into your arrow shaft and your arrow shaft blunderbusses wide open, your penetration all but stops and you're not going to have any penetration at all. So the structural integrity is the most important behind your shot placement to gain penetration in through and maintain that structural integrity through the thoracic cavity to quickly and cleanly kill that animal.
One component of structural integrity, and we'll talk about it a little bit further down the line, is the actual quality of the steel. You could have a razor sharp broadhead made out of moderately durable steel, and if on impact with target animals, and you guys in Africa have some durable critters, you start talking about whacking Cape buffalo and stuff, you're not messing with a white-tailed deer. If the blades themselves stay intact, they don't bend, and the shaft doesn't blunderbuss, but the edge cannot manage to get through 8, 10, 12 inches of critter into the thoracic cavity, sharp. That is a structural integrity problem that is greatly overlooked. So perfect arrow flight is a situation where the arrow is the most stable in the air in the shortest amount of time from the bow, meaning within 3 to 5, 6 feet off the front of the bow, it is flying perfectly straight. It can't be swimming down the target path to the animal, nor can it hit the animal swimming like that, because it will cause the arrow to deflect and do all kind of crazy stuff on impact. There's more than one way to get perfect arrow flight. A lot of people shoot through paper. A lot of people bare shaft, which is my personal favorite thing to do. It takes a lot of work. It's an overlooked component. It takes a ton of time, but once you find perfect arrow flight, whether it's fletched or bare shaft, all of a sudden broadheads fly. And we talked about earlier, we need to have great shot placement. You cannot have an arrow coming off the bow like this, randomly flying towards the animal, and you don't really know where it's going. So perfect arrow flight, especially with fixed blade broadheads like we're talking about with high structural integrity, is a key to actually hitting what you're aiming at and reducing wounding loss. It's also an incredible penetration enhancing factor because the arrow's flying plumb.
Highest possible forward to center. This factor number 3. Structural integrity number 1. Perfect arrow flight number 2. Okay. A lot of people now are coming to us and going, okay, I want to get 25, I want 30% FOC, but then they are forgetting their perfect arrow flight. If you get up, the higher, basically forward to center is your balance point of your arrow. The more weight forward, the better penetration you're going to have. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but tapered shafts have built-in forward to center, allow you to weight these arrow shafts up. Compound users, since you're basically shooting center shot, will have to use, and they're more efficient, will have to use probably a stiffer spine than traditional shooters, which are actually shooting off the shelf and having to wrap around the shelf before they stabilize and straighten out. But the forward center is a very important factor, but you've got to keep it in order. You've got to have your structural integrity, you've got to have your perfect flight, and then work on your forward to center. If you get an 18% forward to center arrow, that's great. If you try to push that arrow to 25% and your flight goes off, stay with your 18% forward to center.
Absolutely.
So, and that's basically, excuse me, that's the gist of forward to center. It's just your balance point of your arrow.
The next factor is high mechanical advantage broadheads. This is going to be a pretty simple example. Dr. Ashby always says, why are wheelchair ramps like this and not like that? So here's a couple of pictures of some high mechanical advantage broadheads. But it's definitely cheaper for the construction team to make a wheelchair ramp like that. It's just not as easy to get up the ramp. We want broadheads that have a very low, long, tapered mechanical advantage for high penetration. Instead of a flat device that's trying to chop, we want to cut and go through. So keep that concept in your head. That's the simplest explanation of mechanical advantage for the broadheads itself, is the wheelchair ramp. And why is it easier to do that? It's a lot less work to push your wheelchair up a very low ramp than it is to go straight up at 45-degree angle. It's exactly the same at impact, because you're hitting meat, bones, ribs, you don't know what you're going to hit, and it doesn't have as much resistance when it hits tissues.
Yeah, yeah. And that long, narrow broadhead, you only have so much energy in that arrow. So you want to maximize that energy, and the higher mechanical advantage broadheads will allow you to maximize the energy of that arrow. The next factor is shaft diameter. And basically it's real simple. I mean, it's the diameter of your shaft. And what you want to do is have your diameter of your shaft just slightly smaller than the ferrule diameter. You do not want your shaft diameter larger than your ferrule diameter, because when that arrow goes in, when that broadhead goes in, it would give you a bump and it would slow that arrow down. So basically, if you stay at worst equal to your ferrule diameter or about 5% less than your ferrule diameter, you will gain about, if you're about 5% less than your ferrule diameter, the testing shows you will get approximately 10% increase in your penetration.
So in Dr. Ashby's testing, higher mass projectiles outperformed lower mass projectiles. What we want is a higher mass projectile. Again, you've got to walk it down. Structural integrity, perfect arrow flight, etc., etc. You can't just say, I'm going to add 200 grains to my arrow, not worry about the flight, and it'll be fine. That will not work. But as you walk down the factors, a higher mass projectile has outperformed, well, my hand's in the way, hang on. A higher mass projectile has outperformed everything in the study, in the testing.
Okay, factor number 7 is the blade edge finish. Basically, razor sharp, honed edges work best. It's proven, I mean, during the testing from filed to the serrated Howard Hill types, but the honed, razor sharp, shaving sharp broadheads work best. Think about it, everybody uses a razor and they shave. Think about when that razor gets dull, it has a hard time even shaving. You toss it, or if you're using a straight razor, you'll sharpen it up. And but think about that, if it has a hard time shaving and you're trying to get that dull arrowhead through hair, much less the hide, meat, a muscle, sinew, bone, you're going to have a real hard time. So it's important that you keep those broadheads razor sharp.
Yeah, I remember in bow hunter education we used to have a ball of rubber bands and we had them tied, and you could slip a broadhead through the rubber bands. If it was dull, it wasn't cutting the rubber band.
Yep.
Of course, if it was razor sharp, rubber bands would be flinging everywhere.
Yep.
It was a good demonstration
Yep.
of exactly what you're talking about, but that was only for arteries. It didn't talk about the hide, the hair, the bones, and the sinew.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why this particular factor is important, even more so.
So there's two components there of what both of y'all are saying. One is the chest wall on a eland or something very large is, you know, we're talking that wide, that thick. That broadhead's got to survive 8, 10, 12 inches of, I'm going to call it stuff. So that is hair, skin, subcutaneous, muscle. There's 5 different layers of muscle in the actual rib cage, making how it functions, and they all go in different directions. It has to get through all of that, then penetrate the pulmonary tissue and the cardiac tissue and the arteries. It has to be sharp after doing all that work.
Factor number 8 is the shaft profile. You basically have 3 different shaft types. You've got a tapered shaft, you've got a parallel shaft, and you've got a barrel tapered shaft. The tapered shaft is actually bigger at the front and it tapers down toward the rear. That is the best arrow shaft for hunting purposes, because basically once that broadhead gets through the medium, it gives it a bigger channel. The shaft is getting smaller, so it's less drag along that shaft. The most popular kind of shaft, due to cost, is a parallel shaft, and it's just basically the same diameter from front to back. And then you've got a barrel taper shaft, which I believe, I've never seen one. I think it's more relegated to the target archery world. But an advantage of a tapered shaft also is it has built-in forward of center, and it's stiffer up on the front by the way it's designed. So it'll help actually overcome impact flex. Upon impact, that arrow is going to flex. Well, the back 1/3 of that tapered shaft is going to flex, versus a parallel shaft on impact flex, it's going to flex right in the middle of that shaft. So, but the tapered shaft is by far the superior shaft for hunting purposes.
All right, factor 9 is broadhead profile. Your broadhead shouldn't have any bumps, lumps, surprises, strange angles, things that pop out or are already popped out when they hit an animal. This kind of goes back to the mechanical advantage discussion. A long, thin, smooth, tapered tool is going to do better work going through the unknown. Again, I kind of keep harping on that, but we don't know what the broadhead's going to hit. There's a very high chance you're going to hit a bone. Ribs are bones. If there's any lumps, bumps, irregularities, strange little objects on the side, ribs, anything like that, it's going to hang. It has a tendency to slow down penetration. So we want a nice, smooth-edged, nice, easy transitions, and nothing to slow down the actual tool itself.
Factor number 10 is your edge bevel type. We are going to talk about 2 different types of edge bevels, a double bevel and a single bevel. A lot of people don't really understand a single bevel, but we're going to talk about it. A double bevel is basically one that's sharpened on both sides, kind of like your typical kitchen knife. And those bevels are anywhere from 25 to 20 degrees. So you've got a total of between 50 to 40 degrees on a double beveled edge head. For that to get through bone, it's just basically utilizing the force of the arrow. It's got to punch through that head utilizing the force of that arrow. Now, single bevel versus a double bevel, you basically have it, you've got one straight edge, and then you normally have a 25-degree angle on your bevel here. So it is a lot thinner edge, and you can sharpen it a lot more than a double bevel. Okay, on a single bevel, you also get a rotational force. Due to the offsetting sharpening, you've got a sharpened edge on this side and a sharpened edge on this side, and it is going to rotate as it goes through the animal, through that medium. And when that hits bone, that rotational force, if it digs into that bone and you have enough of everything else behind it, keeping your forward progress, it is going to snap that bone open, freeing up space for that arrow just to go right through versus punching through like a double bevel. On single bevels, to maintain that durability of that head, since you were running a thin 25-degree angle here, which is super sharp, you've got to use a very high quality steel. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you use a cheap steel, it's not going to perform as well as if you use a high quality broadhead. And basically on single bevels, you're going to be running 2 blades. There's also 3-blade, 4-blade heads out there. I think I've even seen some latest flavors of the day that 6, 8 blades and things like that. However, the single bevel on impact, in order of ranking these broadheads, if you hit bone, the single bevel is best. Double bevel behind that, these are 2 blades. Then a 4-blade on bone, because it will split that bone equally, versus a 3-blade, which as at every 120 degrees will actually wedge itself into that bone and stop. Now, nothing but meat hits. The only change in that is the 3-blade and the 4-blade. You still have the single bevel first, double bevel, then a 3-blade, and then a 4-blade on meat hits.
The actual type of tip you have on the broadhead itself was a major factor for penetration in Dr. Ed's study. The Tonto tip was the highest performing tip. It's basically like a chisel on the front of the broadhead. I actually talked to Ed about this, and he said you need to be thinking about this as a splitting mechanism and then a razor behind it. Conceptually, that's what you want. You want a plan for hitting something hard and having a tool that can do that. And then behind that is razor sharp. We're talking about the very tiniest front leading edge being a Tonto tip and being able to handle whatever it hits. Humerus, dead center on a rib on a Cape Buffalo, keeps on trucking, and then behind that is razor sharp. Most broadheads are sharpened at the same bevel, the same way, all the way out to the tip, and it doesn't allow for a little bit of extra work and what we call Plan B hits to keep on trucking. So the Tonto tip was the highest performing tip in the Ashby study and recommended on all of these very high integrity broadheads and arrow designs.
The biggest advantage for a Tonto tip is once that arrow hits that bone, it is actually digging into that bone. If you have a hard angle shot, it is actually going to dig into that bone versus a lesser head or lesser tip will likely skip off of that bone.
A Tonto tip hits, it digs, single bevel, rotate. Now, I want to be real clear about this. This is not a hole saw. You're not talking about something that's spinning like this going through. We're talking about getting one full rotation through the width of, say, a Gemsbuck. But the harder things it hits, the faster it rotates. Again, it's not going to go like this. It's just going to torque that much more. When you hit normal soft tissue hits, in my testing, it hasn't been a massive, when I've shot between the ribs and stuff, it doesn't rotate as much. When I've hit femurs or humeruses, you see this rotation. It comes out and it's rotated almost all the way around. So it depends on what the broadhead hits as far as imparting the rotation. So that's a good thing. The harder things it hits, the more it rotates, allowing that thing to break open, pop a hole, and get that arrow to go through, instead of stopping and just a long day.
Yeah, and the same on the scapulas, moose scapulas, deer scapulas. It will split the entire length of that bone. It'll just split it in half.
There isn't a flat bone on any animal on earth. They're round, they're curved, they're rhomboids. There's actually in the shoulder, there's a spine in the shoulder blade of every vertically standing animal that stands up like that. So you're never going to hit a flat spot. Again, tonto tip bites in, drives in, and breaks bone. Animals move a little bit. Your shot goes off by 6 inches. You can't determine what it's going to hit. And you have to be able to have maximum penetration in the situation you cannot control, shooting at something that isn't perfectly flat. So it's a great weakness in a lot of the broadhead testing that you see. When you shoot car hoods, pieces of board, anything that's perfectly flat, all broadheads overperform in that situation. And they get through, that's fine. But animals aren't flat. And we don't want any skips. We do not want the broadheads hitting the rib and redirecting, going in the guts. We want it to go straight through whatever it's going to hit.
Factor number 12 is the heavy bone threshold. Basically, in all of Dr. Ashby's studies, he determined that it was right at 650 grains, utilizing all factors, all 12 factors, all lined up, all previous 11 factors, plus over 650 grains. He was able to get 100% penetration through heavy bone, and that was even going down to using 40-pound recurves. So what that doesn't say, if you say you build a 1,000-grain arrow, but you're not following all these factors, you won't get through bone. It won't happen. So, and that is also not saying that you've got to have 650 grains to get through the heavy bone. You can actually use maybe 575 using all these factors, except hitting the 650 grain threshold. And if you hit heavy bone, you might get through it 75% of the time. So, but in all of Dr. Ashby's studies and hundreds of shots where he received 100% pass through on heavy bone into the thoracic cavity was when that arrow was 650 grains and up and utilized all factors.
There's 12 factors here, and as we said, they're ranked. For number 1 is the most important, and as you go down, they reduce in importance, but it's an equation. All the factors need to be there.
Yeah.
This is number 12.
Yeah.
It's the last factor.
Unless you hit heavy bone.
When you hit heavy bone,
it goes to number 3.
Number 3. So
yeah.
plan B, they're not square, they're jumping around, they're moving on you, you don't know what you're going to hit, they start to spin or rotate. In a plan B hit, a 650 grain arrow jumps to, you got to have, it can't break, and it's got to be flying perfect, and then 650 is the number. Then forward to center and everything else. They've all got to be there, but if you hit something hard, this factor bounces. And when you talk to Dr. Ashby, he will say yes. A very light arrow put in between the rib cage will kill everything. I got that. We understand that. Mm-hmm. We're not planning for perfect, because I'm not that good.
I'm not that good either.
I'm betting some of your clients aren't that good. That's a little off the cuff comment there. But so y'all are taking whoever's coming to your camps. You really don't know. A lot of them, what their skill set is, how much stress they're going to be under. Every individual reacts differently when they're in the blind. They've never been to Africa, etc., etc. These 12 factors, if you can get customers to adopt these, you can take some of the human element out, because the projectile is at a very elevated and exponentially a better projectile for doing the work. Once they release the arrow, that's where y'all's job begins.
It's critical for your bow hunters to come over there and know where their shot placement is going to go. It's up to them to practice, 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 and pinpoint their shots where that arrow needs to go. The big disconnect is that we see is people shoot, and just because they can hit that dot, they think they're ready to go hunting, and they don't think about what happens to that arrow on impact and beyond. That's where these 12 factors that we're discussing will really come into play and help that penetration get through that animal and put that animal down quickly.
We also encourage y'all to have either the book on the Vital V or, you know, diagrams of plains game, especially if people are coming from the U.S. The whitetail deer hunter is told to shoot 4 inches behind the crease, and that does it. Over there, we know that that is not going to happen. They're going to be cutting the dog out over and over again or chasing them around. If you follow the 12 factors and you have good shot placement and you've coached your clients right and they shoot them straight up the leg, lower 1/3, the major vessels above the heart, hopefully in the heart, and the forward part of the lungs are all contained in a spot about this big on every animal. Whitetail deer, right above the elbow, and then you guys got the jumbos, right? You got a big area to hit in the Vital V. The major arteries feeding the whole body. The forward part of the lungs is devastating for cardiac function. If you sever one of those major vessels, immediately the animal goes into cardiogenic shock, and they literally can't go. If you hit them back a little further and you just double lung them, it doesn't have, it's lethal. It's a 100 to 150 yard deal. It does not have the amount of blood pressure reduction it does when you put the arrow forward. Now, it's got to go through. It can't be dull after it goes through this much of an eland. It's got to cut once it gets there. But the major vessels forward, any of them severed, and the forward part of the lungs is a devastating shot physiologically and medically. So that's why we want to put the arrows forward. We don't want to shoot them and have to wait 2 hours every time we shoot an animal. That just means you didn't hit anything terribly lethal. You hit something lethal, but not extremely lethal. We want to go forward and rock them and get it over with and knock them down. Let's get the effectiveness rates, you know, elevated to the highest possible situation. So we want that arrow to pass through the chest wall. Weird hits, they run off and they stop. We've all seen some of the light arrow stuff and some of the very popular broadheads these days. I know y'all see it. Go back and review your videos shooting anything expandable and see what the reactions are of the animals when they get hit. They tuck their tail and they run like crazy.
Following up on everything with the shot placement, you're using a 12-factor arrow, you get the full pass-through. You've got now 2 drain holes versus 1 plugged up drain hole with an arrow hanging out of it. So that animal is not going to know anything happened. He's going to go a short distance. He's going to be bleeding out of 2 drain holes. And if he does go out of sight, he's going to leave you a better blood trail.
Simply put, our 3 objectives were be safe, be legal, and take a good shot. Well, that take a good shot was only as effective as that shot placement that you discussed was. And there was that aspect of the equipment in taking a good shot that we weren't covering in basic hunter or bow hunter education. So when they came to me with the 12 factors, I instantly knew that we were going to incorporate this into our hunter and bow hunter education efforts because it made sense. And of course our goal is reduction of wounding loss. And this is all about reducing wounding loss.
If your clients will practice for that perfect shot, and then they will follow these 12 factors. We have 45 years of research and data. And in that research, it was 118 data points per shot taken. 118. That is empirical evidence. Nobody else has it. No one in the archery world has it except us. There's not even anybody in the gun world that we're aware of that has information like this.
And that's all animals. We're not shooting car hoods. We didn't make a fake animal. There's no fake skin. They're not board, skin, gel, fake ribs.
This is really, it's about body count. Plain and simple. Your clients come over, they shoot 1 animal in the morning. They go out at lunch, they shoot another animal. They shoot 2 more at a water hole in the evening. They see these animals drop. You're not spending days with trackers running after an animal that's wounded because they're using inferior equipment. And that makes your clients happy, that makes you happy, definitely makes your trackers happy, and your dogs are happy because they don't have to work as hard.
And there's another component there in the social media world. Y'all all know they're posting pictures. You want to talk about references. Used to be the old days we had to get home, call our friends, tell the stories. 6 months go by, we're in deer camp, and they find out about your operation. Nowadays, they're going to blast those pictures out and say, I shot 4 animals yesterday. And that is going to directly impact your business in a very positive way. It's another reason to explore encouraging your clients to come with a proper arrow system.
We were so impressed with the 12 factors affecting arrow lethality that we modified our bow hunter education manual to include the 12 factors. And this has been a popular little piece, just a summary of what you've been through today.
Donkey and a Wandalika Totsins.
I don't know what that means, but that's awesome. Happy hunting.